So when a baby is born early, they're put into an unnatural environment, okay? Heidi Lee Alls is from Boston and Harvard Children's Hospital, Women and Children's Hospital, and I call her the mother of developmentally supportive care. And so she's been doing research for about 30 years now, I think. And what she says is that preterm babies have preterm brains, okay? They're not developmentally ready for all that stimulation, okay? So before I move to the next slide, so I want you to close your eyes for a minute, okay? And put your two hands out in front of you. Cup your hands, okay? Bring them in close. Some of you have them way out. Yeah, I mean, like kind of by your waist, okay? Yeah, kind of, okay. All right. And then open your eyes and look at this little guy. Okay. So that gives you a sense of Jason, okay? This is I think this was the final issue of Life magazine. And he's a little over 2 pounds here, which is about twice his birth weight. Okay, so he has doubled in size at this point. Okay, all right. So that just gives you a little visual. Okay, so all the research that Heidi has done, Heidi Lee Alls and all those folks that have done the developmentally supportive care, what we've learned is, and I was an EI provider like you. We saw kids who were preemies, and we had kind of this little speech that we gave everybody. Oh, they're going to have retracted shoulders, and they're going to need help with feeding and all that. Well, can't take all of that away, but you can change a lot of that in the nursery by the environment of the nursery. So you try to make it dark, you try to make it quiet. I love that somebody said boundaries or said confinement. Okay. So babies will search for a boundary, okay? So when you're in the NICU, the nurses will put the babies right there in the middle of the isolette, and you'll come back a few minutes later and they will have scooched down into the corner. Then they'll put them back up in the middle and scooch down to the corner. They're searching out those boundaries, they're searching out that security and safety, and they're working on their motor development, because every time they flex and every time they extend, that's part of their development, and that happens those last few weeks or those last few months, and when they're out of the womb, they don't have the opportunity to do that the way they would. So we would build nests around them. But what I want you to realize is that typical sensory development follows a sequential pattern, okay? So the different systems basically mature and come online in an order, okay? And the first system to fully develop is tactile, then vestibular, balance, gustatory, okay, digestion, and olfactory, smell, auditory, and visual, okay, that's last. Visual and hearing are last, vision and hearing. And when the baby's in the womb, each system's interacting with the other system. And if you're outside the womb, that kind of gets messed up because it's not able to interact the same way, and it's impacting the other systems, okay? And if something happens to one system, that's going to affect all the others. I mean, as early interventionists, you know that you can't just work on fine motor development without working on communication and independence and all that at the same time. You can't just work on one thing at a time. So it all fits together. And if something happens with one, you have to think about what's going to happen with the rest. And if you're born early and things are different, the two senses that are most likely to be affected are vision and hearing, because they're the most complex and they're the ones that aren't fully developed until, and you know vision, till well after you're out of the womb, okay? And I already talked about improving the outcomes. So let's think about what that does for the babies, okay? Well, we've already talked about that unnatural environment, okay, and it impacts their development. If some of these babies are really sick, so the medical care and the medical complications, all those concerns, those are going to take priority over developmental and educational concerns. So some of the things that you're likely to see are challenges with state regulation and that attention. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Feeding difficulties, some sensory defensiveness, tactile defensiveness, and those are the kids who can't have tags, that don't want their shoes on all the time, don't want their socks on, they're throwing them off all the time. And then difficulty processing that sensory input. What happens is full-term babies actually have MRIs show that they have fewer connections in their brain. What happens is the babies, when they're born early, their brains are still developing, the synapses are being formed, and because of all that stimulation, they actually develop more. They develop more neurons, more pathways, and more of those connections, and so they are often overstimulated and they are hyper alert. Okay, you may have a family who's, it's like I talked to a mom once who. This baby would only calm down when he was in his pumpkin seat on the dryer or on the washer. They get acclimated to that, and that's what they want and need. And it makes it very difficult then to filter out other things. Okay, so they may not necessarily. Some of the kids do have additional severe disabilities and complex disabilities, but a lot of these kids are the ones with just little, not just little, but who have milder learning problems, have difficulty filtering, difficult paying attention, difficulty focusing on things, and that whole sensory thing. Okay, so what does this mean for the families? Okay, life is an emotional roller coaster for them, and we're going to talk in several slides later about bonding, but it's hard to bond with your baby. Okay, they're feeling overwhelmed. They might have feelings of guilt, okay? They're going to be angry, worried, resentment. A lot of times they feel like nobody understands. Another common feeling is that the baby belongs more to the nurses than to them, okay, because they're the ones that are there with them all the time. And then just the time in the hospital and beyond. How do you balance the time if you have a job, if you have other children? How do you balance all those things? Finances, you can have insurance, but 20% of $2 million is still a lot of money, even if you have great insurance and it covers 80 or 90%. So babies go home with, and I've been with families who, you see marriages and relationships just, it's such a strain. Some of them don't survive that stress and strain. At-risk parents, so teen parents, okay, moms who have their own, single moms, moms who are battling their own mental health issues or addiction issues, makes that even harder. And those emotional effects can be long-lasting on the parents, okay. There's some, I talked to a dad one time who, whoops, this went out, oh, there it is. I talked to a dad one time who was telling about when he goes to McDonald's with his kid, which his kid loved to do, but he would, kind of got nervous and just got real jittery, and the dad, okay, couldn't figure out why. And finally one day he realized that the sound of the beeping in the back when the French fries were done took him back to the NICU, and so you just never know. It's tough. It's tough stuff. Okay. So for service providers, okay, we talked about the family, we talked about the baby. So how about you guys out there? Okay. So please prioritize sensory issues. This is one I am going to read because and think about those sensory issues right from the start. If there's a baby that's born prematurely, think about vision and hearing, not just one or the other, but both. Make sure you get both of them taken care of. You're going to need a collaborative team. It's going to need to be customized for that baby. You're going to need some PT, or make sure you call Annie and see if there's vision stuff that she can help you with. And think about that hospital experience and realize that around the time of the baby's birth, the next year, 2 years later, if you're still working with a 3-year-old, the anniversary of that baby's birth might be difficult, even though by then they're all past their adjusted age and all those things. Some of these babies are a surviving twin. Maybe their brother or sister didn't make it, okay? You have to be really gentle with families. And just knowing that and then thinking about that can impact how you work with the family. And then as professionals, aren't we all fall into the trap of, well, that family, if they would only just, well, I've suggested this, and, they've got, why didn't they follow up? I told her to call the ophthalmologist. She may not have even heard you say you need to call the ophthalmologist. When those babies are being released from the hospital, they're given all this information. So give them some time, give them some space. One of the things that I used to do was talk to a family, and, it would be the referral, and we'd do the intake, we'd have that initial visit, whatever, and talk some about what their priorities were, sometimes I'd say, what's the worst part of your day? What's the worst part of your day? And then I would try to help, work on that one little thing that could help with that worst part of the day, okay? And then sometimes I would say, I just want to give you this information now, I just want to leave it with you now. When would you like me to call you back? And you're going to meet families that are like, give me everything there is to read, give me every website, and they'll read it all, and then there's going to be some families that don't want to talk to you for 2 months. They just need, their baby may have been in the hospital for 6 months, and this is the first time their baby's home. And we're so anxious to get in there and help them because we know things that will help developmentally and educationally, but it's really not going to take unless we give them the time to be ready. So go ahead and give them some space, give them some time. We already talked about, some family behaviors, and it may go back to some deep-rooted stuff, the loss of a child, the loss of the sibling, the twin that didn't survive, the difficulty of the pregnancy, being in, maybe having been in the hospital for the last 8 weeks of your pregnancy with your feet up and hanging practically upside down. And so just be careful how you use your words, okay? If a baby's already been diagnosed with a vision loss and you're thinking there's maybe something else going on, you need to find some gentle ways to talk about that and just say, oh, well, your baby's this, we need to make sure this. I know a colleague who, one of the things that she does, which I think is a great tip, she says, oh, since this baby has vision loss, we want to make sure that everything is as good as it can be with their hearing. So would it be okay with you if we refer her to an audiologist? Or vice versa. Oh, your baby has a hearing loss? Well, we got to make sure that vision, that they can use their vision the best that they can. So let's make sure about the vision. So just be gentle and be careful how you use your words. So those ongoing, so some of the kids are home now, they're ongoing, a lot of the kids we've talked about with additional disabilities. You guys know this. I see lots of head shaking as I'm saying this, so it's not rocket science, it's not news to you, but I think it's just really important to remember in the whole scheme of things here. Got lots of record keeping to do, lots of appointments to make. Their life has been disrupted. One of the things that Heidi also, some of her articles talk about the fact that a lot of these babies are born before the parents ever went to their childbirthing classes. So they really didn't get any of that education about what it's going to be like when you take your baby home from the hospital. They're worried they've been told take your baby home and make your baby comfortable till they die. And Lisa and I and Megan and I all know kids who are now 22 whose parents were told that. So realize that they're worried about that. The other thing that happens, I think, is, at first when the baby's in the hospital and then the baby comes home from the hospital, you've got lots of people, maybe the church is bringing you meals and somebody's watching your kids and people are helping out. And then you're home from the hospital and some of that starts to kind of go away. But the baby still requires a lot of attention, or the toddler or the 3-year-old, so just realize that the families are going to still need all kinds of support. And that's one of the great things about Part C is we don't look just at the infant or the toddler, we look at the whole family, and I think that's terrific. We've talked about strains on marital relationship before already, so down at the bottom, okay, so we've talked about the family stressors, but the gaps in learning, okay, so maybe the baby has to go back to the hospital, okay, and so some things have been happening, and then and maybe something happened to the baby that's going to impact those skills that they had already learned, and it's going to take longer to get them back, or maybe they won't get them back. okay, or just that lost time. And we all know what happens, you know, when we go home for summer vacation and kids come back later when you have that gap. And the effects of the medication on kids. You have to know what and those are, again, the things that you can get help with from your other team members. Talk to the pediatrician, you know, read those birth records, read those health history, get help from nurses, get help from doctors, people that you can talk about and really understand the effects of that medication. When will the child be most alert? When can you schedule your home visit so the child will be most alert? And along with the those missed opportunities for practicing those skills, you also need to realize that because of all that's been going on with babies with ongoing medical issues, that the emphasis, the priority for the family may be protecting that child, so they may be more cautious, okay? They may have lower expectations, partly because maybe somebody at the hospital said,